Everybody else in quarantine is making sourdough or experimenting with grandma's bread recipes and all this other sort of stuff. And I am going to be making another batch of ancient Egyptian temple incense. You've probably heard or seen me refer to this under a couple of different names. The most common is Kyphi or Kyphi. I've heard it pronounced 15 different ways, so it's an ancient dead language, whatever. It's spelled Kyphi. Fun thing about that is an Anglicanized version of an Hellenized version of the Egyptian word kaphet, which just means incense. So, a little bit about this ancient incense. Actually, let me say why I started making it in the first place. I mean, first of all, it's just kind of neat. There's a lot of controversy and an argument among both scholars and magical practitioners on what actually went into Kyphi or kaphet, what made this particular incense, because it had uh, many ingredients, and some tellings of it, like up to 18 different ingredients went into this to make this like very multi-layered, very expensive, elaborate scent. uh, so the ancient Egyptians would burn incense regularly in their temples. There was incense that was burned in the morning and at noon and at night. Frankincense and myrrh individually were the ones that were burned in the morning and burned at night, burned at noon. And then Kyphi or kapet was the scent that was burned in the evening, and it was in one of the ancient manuscripts referred to as the scent that delights in the night. It had connections to dreams and visions, and sort of like opening and inviting the visionary state, and also opening and inviting the spirits for communication. So, like all of the stuff that you would fall into slumber to try to communicate with. Kyphi was the gatekeeper. It would throw wide the gates with its smell, which is another reason why trying to recreate it has been an obsession of a lot of magical practitioners for many years. The hard part is there is no complete recipe that has survived. We have, well, that's not entirely correct. We have complete recipes, and the problem is in several cases we don't know the translation for some of the ingredients, and there's a lot of argument about what those words actually are supposed to mean. Um, Given that this is an incense recipe that goes back at least to 2000 BCE and probably longer, like it is referenced all the way back in the coffin texts. Uh, it's entirely possible some of these plants are extinct. We know for a fact that some of the things that were used in ancient Greece and Rome don't exist anymore. And a point of fact, one of the key ingredients in Kyphi, called gum mastic, usually also known as Chios mastic, named after the island in Greece, which is literally the last place on earth where the stuff grows. Now, the trees that give this resin up grow in multiple other places, but the circumstances, the environment necessary for them to create the resiny tears that become gum mastic only occur anymore at this point in time on a single solitary Greek island. And it's sought after for its properties as a digestive and a stomachic, a gum that you chew, it's edible, and it's attributed with a lot of healing properties, and it's fairly expensive. Lots of the stuff that goes into Kyphi or kapet is very expensive. To think back to ancient Egypt, a lot of their trade, a lot of their imports really revolved around the stuff that went to the temples to support the gods and the worship of the gods. And so these things that went into this incense were rare commodities, highly sought after, very expensive. Ancient Egyptian incense is very different from what we now go down to our little witchcraft store and pick up, or New Age store, or whatever head shop that you maybe get your incense from. Uh, Modern incense, you're probably familiar with sticks or cones, and those are usually different scented oils and things infused into a base of uh, a ground wood, sometimes also ground charcoal, and that is sort of like put together in this dough or paste. For like the self-lighting cones, it's usually charcoal, and they have saltpeter, which is a functional constituent of gunpowder, um, mixed into them so that they are self-lighting. Uh, Ancient Egyptian incense was totally different. The closest that we have in terms of modern incense is something called bakur, and that is still used in the Middle East today. They are little bricks of tightly compressed scented woods and resins, and they have to be burned at a very low temperature. There are very specific burners made for burning bakur to release the scent. Which, here in a lot of Western practice, what we end up with is you go to the store, especially if it's loose incense, you buy a little charcoal, you light the charcoal, you wave the smell of the charcoal out of the room because it has a scent. If you've ever used self-lighting charcoal, it has a scent. And then you sprinkle your incense onto that. Well, the charcoal is burning at a really high temperature, so you get a lot of smoke, and you don't get quite the same scent. A lot of incenses, especially the things that are more plant-based than resin-based, you get more of the charred smell. You are smelling them burn and carbonize. And for some incenses, this still works. For something that is like kapet or bakur, you are missing so much of this particular incense's scent. So why is that? Instead of charcoal or compressed wood as the base, they would use fruit, dried fruit. The recipes call it raisin, or at least the word that it's translated into is raisin. There's a high likelihood from the description that what they actually mean is date. Uh, Notably, there are multiple different recipes of related incenses, some of which use figs, some of which use dates, some of which use raisins. My initial batch of Kyphi, I used medjool dates. That Kyphi was incredibly sticky and hard to work with. And there's a small chance that I got the wine off by, like, I put in too much wine because I was worried that I was going to scorch it when I was cooking it. So this one I'm going to try to go with raisins, as is the traditional translation. Yeah, questions.
So
Yay.
we have a couple of questions already. The first one that I wanted to ask is it okay to just pop in with questions as they come?
Yeah, please, because I'm right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna probably, after I do like a little bit of like, this is what I'm doing and why, I've got to chop. Okay, so yeah, like the simple thing is so there's only a few recipes that have come down to us over the thousands of years since this stuff was created. The most complete recipe can be found on the walls of the laboratory room in the temple complex at Edfu in Egypt. And that one is exciting because it includes measurements. Now, the downside is those measurements are meant for like a year's supply for this temple. I mean, I had to divide that measurement by 150 to make a workable. I am creating not 15 tons of freaking incense. Like, it was
that would be like, a little much.
No, it was like you needed like 3 pounds of raisins and like it was pounds of stuff. It was ridiculous. So I reduced it, and then I kind of fiddled around a little bit and turned it into measurements that I can use in my kitchen. Now that's going to be like a little bit off because they were going off of weights, and the weight of things and density is going to be a little bit different. And I decided in the end, as much as I want to recreate it as realistically as possible, the small amounts that it's going to be off, versus the fact that I'm just going to be able to measure it, I'm okay with that.
So the question that came up was, how long does the whole process of making it take? Someone had heard that it needed to like soak or marinate for a full lunar cycle.
So according to the Edfu stuff, and there's a couple of books, and I'm going to chronicle this process. The first step, which I'm doing today, takes 5 days. and that is chopping up the raisins and a couple of other simple things like juniper berries, and these are pine nuts. Pine nuts are one of the things that people aren't 100% sure that that's what they meant, but enough people agreed that I'm sticking with it. And I used them in the previous incense and they were fine. Um, One of the things about the ingredients is Kyphi, in addition to being used as an incense, was also used medicinally. It was eaten as a breath mint. And so we know from that is if it's something that you're meant to be able to eat, the stuff that goes into it can't be poisonous. Mm. Now, there's some argument that a couple of the things are a little hallucinogenic, but the ancient Egyptians were kind of wild child folk. Like, if it was a little hallucinogenic, that wouldn't have been a bad thing for the incense, given what it was supposed to do. Which actually led to, like, there's a couple of ingredients that are disputed. Nobody's 100% sure what they're supposed to be. The one that I really could not track down with certainty, with complete certainty, is spelled pecker. Peker is how we turn it into English. And there was everything from arguments that it was sesame seeds, which made no damn sense, to opium, which made a little bit more sense, to henna, for one person's interpretation. And I was looking at the hieroglyphs for pecker. I'm just going to call it pecker, so I'm not saying pecker every 5 minutes. And the hieroglyphs reminded me of something I'd seen. I am not an Egyptologist. I am going to get that right out of the way. But I have studied hieroglyphs in an amateur fashion. And I'd say that I've got a handful that I recognize, mostly Old Kingdom. It gets really dodgy once it's in hieratic, and New Kingdom is really weird. But Old Kingdom is much more simple. And what I saw for a representation of the stuff in the Edfu text, as well as there's a medical manual that also has a recipe, a different recipe, but there's a bunch of things it has in common. Long story short, I think my interpretation of pecker at this point is sycamore, but not the sycamore trees that grow out here. There's a different type of sycamore that grows over there. It's a sycamore fig, and it was sacred to Osiris. Sarcophagi, the coffins in Egypt, were traditionally made out of sycamore wood because of their connection to the myth of Osiris. And the symbols that represent this word pecker in the Kyphi recipe that comes down to us are very close, if not identical. Like there are a bunch of things in common, except for like one determinative with sycamore and a place name that basically means the sycamore grove of Osiris. So, and on one hand, I'm like, but how did nobody else make that connection? So it's possible that I'm wrong and I'm just drawing lines that aren't there. But Kyphi was sacred partly also, and it had so many different ingredients. If you are familiar with Egyptian mythology, in later cycles, you have this god named Osiris, and Osiris is the husband of Isis. And in the later cycles of the Osiris myth, Osiris has a brother who's an asshole, and that brother is Set. I'm saying later cycles because if you go much further back, Set is actually the twin of Horus and plays a completely different role. But by the time you get to the Ptolemaic periods and Hellenic Egypt, Set is a bad guy. He is equated with the Greek god Typhon. In many ways, he inspires Satan. And if there's any like academic question about that, I will refer people to the Ethiopic text, the Book of the Mysteries of Heaven and Hell. The Book of the Mysteries of the Heavens and the Earth, where you see Set, Sataniel, Sethiel, like all mixed and mingled in this fantastic syncretic thing of Ethiopic Coptic Christianity that took Egyptian stuff, local folkloric stuff, and Christianity and Judaism, and made a great big mush out of it.
So there's a question about where people can find ingredients for Kyphi or Kapet.
Okay, so
specifically it was from someone, I think, in Indianapolis, but I think the question applies to pretty much anywhere. Can you find everything you need online? Can you grow some of it?
A lot of this stuff mostly comes from places not here. Like some of it is easy. Juniper berries. We've got juniper berries. That's not hard. Pine nuts. They're not necessarily going to be the same pines that grew over there, but we definitely have plenty of pines from which we can get pine nuts and pine resin. Pine resin is also used in this. Raisins. Yep, we got plenty of raisins. Frankincense is a little more tricky, and this is also where, like, maybe I'm psychic and maybe it was just a timing thing, but I got a wild hair up my ass to recreate this incense last year. I think I started the research around January or so, and that led me to making purchases to places like Wild Tree Essentials, who wild harvest frankincense and myrrh and a couple of the other rarer resins. There are some more affordable versions of frankincense, up to frankincense that's like $60 an ounce. Most of the frankincense is harvested from Oman and various parts of Arabia. Myrrh comes from, let's see, there's Arabian myrrh, there's myrrh that you can get from India. The gum mastic, like I said, you have to go through the solitary island in Greece where it comes from. Galbanum is a resin that is identified with, in some versions, with this stuff. Right now, galbanum, it's from Iraq, and because of sanctions, I got it once, and I have not seen it available since. Labdanum is another fairly rare one. I have only seen an obscure Etsy up in Canada that's selling it at all. Also, well, actually, no, labdanum, my source for labdanum is the same place that I get the Chios gum, the mastic. And that is Botano. I think it's .gr, like the Greece. So look up Botano, Greek. And it's a little store on a Greek island in Greece. And they sell labdanum, and they sell the gum mastic. They sell a bunch of other things, Dittany of Crete, things that are harvested locally. As these things go, their prices are good, but understand it is costly to get them shipped. With the pandemic, I think it is even costlier. So I hit the perfect time. The simple answer is some of them are going to cost you if you want to go as recreationist as I did with this. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it like as old school as possible is I wanted to get the smell. I wanted to know, what does this smell like if you do it by the book? If I recreate this as completely as possible. And let me explain that I went a little extreme. Because the other thing is, it's not just the stuff that you're making. They would boil these in copper cauldrons. Copper, if you're familiar with it, and why you have like your mule drinks in a little copper cup, is there is, and actually if you're familiar with candy making, there's a reason why you have a little copper zablia, I can't pronounce it, pan. There's a chemical thing that happens, a reaction that happens with copper. And while it's not good for most foods, specifically for things that have a high sugar content, copper is your best thing. And so they would brew this and let it stand and rest and not exactly ferment, but definitely like have all of the stuff pull the scents out in copper. And so let me tell you, finding an unlined copper pot, not easy. I ended up, this is the first time I've owned a cauldron, or what feels like a magical cauldron, from a generational coppersmith. Seriously, there were two places to get this thing. One was in France and one was in Italy. And the guy in Italy just like, I liked the family story. I liked their attitude. So Rinamata Rameria Mazzetti made my big copper Kyphi pot. This is used for nothing other than Kyphi at this point. It was not cheap at all. $300, I think. I dog-eared a bunch of money to put into this, knowing it was going to be a research project. And I happened at the time to be in a position where I could set some money aside and be like, okay, this. Part of it was also to try to create something that was a past life trigger. Scent has a significant impact on memory. And for those of you who don't know it, my group House Keperu, we do have some, many of us have lives that we think do tie back to various points along the very extensive ancient Egyptian timeline. And I thought it would be really neat to try to create the actual temple incense, to smell that and see what does that do? Does that help with past life regressions? Does that help get us, what effect does it have to make this from the book? And so the expense was kind of a lot. I've not actually sat down and calculated how much I spent, but that gives you an idea.
There are also a couple of questions about whether Kyphi or Cuphead can be eaten safely, both either for people or if it's safe for animals. I'm not sure if the question about animals was for eating it or for burning it.
For burning, it's fine. There are two ingredients that I would be concerned if the animals got into. The main one being calamus root. That's something that you probably shouldn't be eating a whole lot of either, but it's a very small amount that goes in. It's a scent fixative. If you're really worried about it, you could substitute orchis root, but that also is pretty much like bulbs of any sort with most animals, cats especially. Just try to keep them away from them, which is also why when we get to the part where I'm grinding some of these things, because you have to grind them by hand, I do it out in the garage because I do not want the chance of the cats just coming in and being like, what's that? And then suddenly I have, kidney failure. It is edible. You can eat it. I'm going to warn you, it doesn't taste good. It's very medicine-y and very strong. And as much as there's raisins and honey and stuff that goes in there, the frankincense and the myrrh and the mastic and the pine resin and everything else gives it a very sharp anise bitter flavor. So you can eat it if you're really curious and you make your Kyphi dough before you roll it and cure it. Get a little bit, taste it. But trust me, if you're making it the way I make it and you're boiling it and everything, your whole house is going to smell of it. You're going to smell of it. You're going to have it in your hair. The scent lasted in my hair for days. It was just my whole kitchen smelled of this stuff because you are leaning over that copper pot boiling stuff down to basically hard crack candy stage. And for folks who've made candy, I discovered definitely it's a lot like candy making once it gets to the later stages. So to go back to how long does this take? The first step is 5 days. Come on in. I don't care.
Just pop right
People
in.
live in this house. Hello. One of my rarely seen roommates. Guess what? There's 5 of us who live here in quarantine right now. We haven't killed one another. Largely, I think, because of World of Warcraft.
Wait, there's only 5 of us now?
Well,
What happened to the
2,
number
3, 4, 5.
But I thought there were 9.
Oh, cats? Wait, what? Oh, are you implying that we've eaten people?
No,
Or
I was
something?
implying that we were the Mighty 9.
Oh,
But
okay.
that's okay.
No,
I can see
critical-
why you were.
I'm sorry, the critical role joke is completely lost on me. I am busy expounding upon ancient Egyptian
incense.
blah 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 and being very, very serious.
And scholarly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
serious.
yep, so
Well,
serious.
always.
Okay, so main recipe I've gone off of is the one that appears on the walls of Edfu. Once I have the notes typed up in a way that don't look like what they look like, I'm happy to share it. This is not some huge trade secret. You are welcome to poke at stuff. And when I've made the choice of nobody totally knows what this one is, I've got a couple of well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. This is why I've made this choice. and you may make a different choice. I've read a couple of sources that say that like every maker of incense had sort of like their own house recipe for this stuff. Oh, I got sidetracked on Isis and Osiris. Osiris, when Set becomes a bad guy, there's this whole thing about kingship, and Set wants to be pharaoh, and Osiris is pharaoh, and sibling rivalry being what it is, in a kind of Cain and Abel proto story. Set convinces Osiris to go into a thing, and he cuts him up into a bunch of pieces, and he scatters his bodies all over the place. And I'm hyper simplifying, but it's relevant to Kyphi. Is after her husband is murdered by Set, and his body parts are scattered all up and down the Nile, Isis goes on like this extensive quest to find all of the pieces of her dead husband and put them back together again, and carefully preserve them and mummify them so that he may live again. As a funny note, the only piece she can't find is his cock and balls. That was ripped off, chucked into the Nile, and a fish ate it. That fish is basically named Penis.
You know the weirdest pieces of biblical history.
Egyptian mythology is weird. Don't even get me started on the creation myth where God basically gets up out of the waters, masturbates the world into existence. Like, that's a thing.
Yeah.
And then, like, the first two things he creates is Shu and Tefnut.
Oh, no. Okay.
Like seriously. Probably
Remy's suddenly very interested in this whole process. Yeah. Do you think he's here for the incense or for the myths?
Well, it's probably good that I'm not cooking this for people to eat now that I'm just like, right over the raisins.
That's very true.
Okay, so that's why all the different body parts of Osiris is why there's so many different pieces to Kyphi. Each one was a representation of a body part of Osiris. Also why I thought Peker might be sycamore because of the tie to Osiris. So there's that. Also why, another reason it took so long to create traditionally was it was done in ritual. So there were prayers, there were specific things that other priests had to recite while someone was grinding all of this stuff down. A far cry from me sitting here live streaming, but we're going to start the first bit of it. So again, working mainly from the EdFood laboratory room text, I need 2 cups of raisins, chopped, loosely packed, and without seeds. So seeded. One of the other reasons I thought that maybe they really meant dates is they mentioned that you have to open these up, take the seeds out, and clean the inside. Which doesn't sound like a raisin to me.
Unless, well, they might not have been working with seeded or de-seeded raisins.
Well, yeah, but if you, I got like, I again, being obsessive about it, I ordered some like really old school raisins from a region over there, and they had bigger seeds than we're used to, even in the ones that are over here, but it's still multiple little seeds. They don't open up in the way that they were describing, and you don't wash it out the same way. A date is a completely different matter entirely. But we're going to try the raisins this time, and then finally chop them, and try not to take my finger off while I'm doing so.
Seems good. Would this be a good time for me to go get that nutsedge for you?
Yeah, if you could go get the nutsedge. That one is honestly the biggest pain in my ass because you have to grind it, and it is like trying to grind granite. Tiny little pebbles of granite. One of the other things that I wanted to do by making this, and again, recreating it as clearly as possible was, all right, so making it the original way is fucking expensive. But what does it smell like? Like, is there a hack? Is there a cheat? Is there a way to get this effect that does not involve making costly orders to 5 different countries and waiting for things to pass through customs? And then like going through this entire process for basically 2 weeks, give or take. And the end result is if you want the actual smell, like all of the layers to the smell, the answer is no. But on the other hand, you can kind of get by with a mix with frankincense and myrrh and honey, and a little bit of mint and lemongrass. There's a couple of different online like Etsy shops. I think it's Mermaid, as in Mer, Made. Don't quote me. I can have Illyria look it up in a minute. And they've got a variation of Kyphi. I believe they've got cinnamon in there. There were a couple of choices that I'm like, not sure that I agree, but if it smells good, cool. They notably do not do the raisin and honey base. They do not do the red wine base. They macerate all of their stuff and let it steep in honey wine. So I am curious. I haven't bought theirs to try it out. I know that there are multiple Etsy sellers that sell Kyphi either in bricks or in little like rounded cured balls. Oh yeah, the other thing about it taking as long as it fucking does, so they're not kidding when they say it takes a while for it to cure. I made my Kyphi Capet last year and timed it so I would have a week or so for it to cure once it was all done, in time for House Kepru's annual gather. And the thing I learned is that shit was not ready for another 6 months. Like, it did not get hard in the way it's supposed to. It did not cure for at least 6 months. Now, some of that is it's really, really muggy here. It's not like New Orleans muggy, but it's pretty muggy. And it needs a place, I mean, where it was being made did not have nearly the amount of moisture in the air as we do out here. It's also why this is a thing that I think is best made probably where I live in the spring or the fall, not the full heat of summer, because out here that heat comes with a pretty solid blanket of moisture thanks to Lake Erie.
So, is there another name that nutsedge might go by? Because I looked in all the tall jars.
Cyperus grass.
Oh, that's the first one I looked at, and I wondered when I looked at it. But okay, well, I'll be right back.
Yeah. My trusty, patient, and very, very tolerant wife. The other thing I have tried to do with this to be as by the book as possible is I do not let any plastic or synthetics touch the stuff that I'm working with. So it's either in china, in stone, in glass, on a bamboo thing, olive wood spoons.
Oh, well, that's funny that you said that just now, because there was just a question from Suze, in fact.
I might be psychic, guys.
Could you use a food processor and spice grinder, or is the hand cutting and grinding part of the personal ritual?
I will be honest, in the case of nutsedge, I tried to cheat with a spice grinder, and that shit broke it. So, and I tried another one because I sat there trying to grind this stuff, and the nutsedge is the one that like really, really gives me trouble because there are these little rhizomes that are, you know, basically the roots of a certain type of grass. They have a fantastically weird, like, earthy but medicine-y smell. Like, I've never smelled anything like it. And so I deem them as like, okay, clearly they go into this, but I don't know how you're supposed to hand grind those things. I've got this big old thing that is made out of volcanic stone that I found is probably the best and easiest at grinding these things up. I'm going to say you can get away with it, and be aware a couple of the ingredients are a pain in the ass and probably going to gum some of the things up.
There's a question, actually there's a pair of questions. Yeah. What are the properties of the incense? And there had also been a question a little while ago about whether it was ever used for healing
Mm.
by priests in Egypt.
Yeah. So it appears in the Ebers Papyrus, Ebers, which is a medicinal papyrus. And so it appears as a medicine. And so it was also used medicinally. And oh, trying to remember, I know stomach problems was one of the things it was used for, which makes some sense, to freshen the breath. But I believe that there were 3 or 4 other things, kind of in keeping with a lot of the old medical texts, where it was like, it cures dysentery, and it cures your flatulence, and it also cures your bad teeth, and like 5 other things. Those are not necessarily the things. I'm just rattling off some random stuff. So yes, it was used medicinally. Burned. It seems like it was mostly used at that point religiously. And the creation of it was a little bit like Catholic transubstantiation. Like, you are rebuilding the body of Osiris with each of the ingredients, which is why it was this long, drawn-out, ritualized process, and why you said prayers. You were basically, as the creator of this, taking on the role of Isis and putting Osiris back together with each of the ingredients. The end of that story is she breathes life into him, takes the form of a kite, a type of raptor bird, and conceives the child Horus, who then becomes the inheritor of his father's role of pharaoh. And Osiris goes to rule over the underworld, while Horus grows up to become the ruler, the pharaoh. In that version, Set still gives Horus some shit, and it's a very long, drawn-out cycle called the Contendings of Horus and Set. It's interesting because basically Set becomes the creepy uncle who does some modern, inappropriate things with Horus. If you look up Set's lettuce patch,
oh goodness,
I won't go into it, but there's some, like I said, like they had a lot of different social mores. They were very earthy people. I mean, they have a big, erect, ejaculating penis that is one of their hieroglyphs. Like, it's part of the language. When one of your letters is a cock, you have a different attitude
so
towards sex and sexuality.
So we shouldn't really wonder where the Romans got it from.
No, we really shouldn't. I mean, the Romans had their own hang-ups too.
Presumably they all got it from the same place.
Well, I don't know. Like, Priapus with Romans was a different thing. But yeah, very, very different attitudes. All right. This is the first cup of.
Oh my.
Yeah, there's 2 of these that I get to go through. This is not a simple process. All right. I deem these chopped enough.
Hurrah!
Finely chopped. Into the big pot they will go.
Do you want to hand the pot?
That would be great. As I'm covered in sticky bits of raisin.
You are. And I would rather hold the pot than be covered in sticky raisin. I'm helping so much.
Yep.
This is one big witch's cauldron.
It is the first time I'm like, this actually feels like I have a witch's cauldron, and has a certain magic to it.
Look at all these snacks lying around.
Well, the juniper berries, I don't know that I would eat by themselves. They are.
I was actually staring at the raisins in the pine nut.
Yeah, no, the juniper berries are good as a spice.
I had a friend who made what he called gin from juniper berries, but it was just like juniper berries and water left for a few months.
That's not how that works.
Funny.
That's not how that works. I mean, probably the cheapest thing in this whole mess, carved olive wood scraper from World Market. Okay, so
Part one.
Cup one of
What are all the parts that you're gonna add in?
So today it's going to be the raisins, the juniper berries, which I will crush, the pine nuts, which I will crush, and I'm gonna cheat because it should be also me sitting here grinding the rhizomes for like 3 hours. I'm also going to take, so I'm supposed to put in a cup and a half of red wine. I'm going to put in a cup of red wine. I'm going to put in a half a cup of red wine and soak the nutsedge in the desperate hope that it will soften up a little bit. The last time that didn't work so great, but I can hope. I would love to be able to put that through a food processor. It's like putting pea gravel into a food processor. So I haven't found something that it doesn't shatter. Like when the blades hold up, most of the things, like the body is plastic, so it shatters the plastic. And then you end up with plastic in your Kyphi, and that's not a desirable thing.
No good.
All right, cup two. Yay. Wow. It's a long process.
Yeah.
It's even longer standing over that when I'm boiling it down. That was 7 hours.
Holy moly.
You were on a hike or something when I was doing it. There was a point where I'm like, Paul, could you stir this for 30 minutes while I go out somewhere and get food?
Oh my gosh. And don't worry, everyone, we won't make you stay for that whole thing.
No. I'm not sure we'll even stay for like the grinding of stuff. But I mean, things, if you want to do the full experience, the least that you need, get a mortar and pestle. Make sure you are only using that mortar and pestle for the incense stuff. It's not, once you use it for some of these things, you shouldn't use it for food. So keep it separate like that. None of the pots that I make this stuff in are used for food either. A pot, a metal pot, if you can, an unlined copper pot. Be aware those are not cheap.
They're also hard. It's hard to figure out if they're lined or unlined. I think the default here is lined.
Yes. Mauviel, which is the French company I was talking about. I pretty much said there were 2 places that did it. Mauviel makes one that is unlined. What you would be looking for is a copper pot used in candy making, and also for meringues. An unlined copper pot is fantastic for making the perfect light, fluffy meringues because of the chemical interaction that happens with the egg whites and the sugar. Things I learned in researching Kyphi.
Very fancy.
Yeah, there's a point where you take honey and you take your frankincense and you melt the frankincense into the honey. And let me tell you that the scariest part about that is it pretty much turns into napalm. Like, it is this thick, sticky, molten stuff that you do not want to drop on any part of your exposed flesh. It is hot. It will burn on contact and it stays there. So don't have small children or small pets where you're gonna, if you are afraid of a spill or if somebody's gonna like get up in your stuff. Let's see. Okay, so the recipe as I will be working with it is 2 cups of raisins.
If you go nice and slow, I'll write it down and post it in the comments.
2 cups raisins, chopped, loosely packed. 1/2 cup of sweet red wine. Why red wine? Why sweet? The Egyptians had wine. Their wine was red. Their wine was renowned for its sweetness. So if you're using Egyptian wine like they used to make it, a sweet red wine, it's hard to find a sweet red wine, by the way. Okay, 1.5 cups of Oasis wine. This I cannot find. It's date wine. It is wine made out of dates. There is literally a single winery in Israel that makes this stuff, and they do not export it. So I just use another 1.5 cups of the same red wine. Like, that's just what you got to do. So date wine would be preferable. If you have better luck than I do on finding actual wine made of dates, that would be great. 2 cups of raw unfiltered honey.
Okay.
3/4 of a cup plus 1 tablespoon, and you might as well just make that a full cup, of frankincense.
Frankincense.
3/4 of a cup of myrrh. Arabian myrrh, if you can find it.
Okay.
Okay, now this is going to be a longer list. These are 3 tablespoons each of the following. Or do you want to just say 3 tablespoons for each of them? You okay with typing that over and over again?
Let's do fewer.
Okay. 3 tablespoons each of gum mastic, pine resin, which you can buy commercially as rosin. Just make sure it's, not cut with something. Mint. Something called sweet flag, which is available as calamus root, Calamus root. That's the fixative I was talking about.
Okay.
Something that appears in the recipe as aspalathos, Aspalathos. It is one of the ones that people are like, we're not 100% sure what this is, but given that a number of things were given the names in Greek and Roman that they once had, there is a thing that aspalathos is part of its technical scientific name, honeybush, which we use as tea.
Huh.
It's a type of rooibos. There's or it's also sold like rooibos. So some people insist that it is rooibos. Look for honeybush. It has a sweeter, subtler flavor and scent. And in doing research on it regionally, it happens to grow closer to where they were harvesting this.
Okay.
So honeybush is the one that I say is probably the. So then camel grass, which is just a variety of lemongrass.
Okay.
And then an easy one, cinnamon.
Yay.
Wait, just lying, because depending on where you're buying your cinnamon, you're not actually buying cinnamon, you're buying cassia. So you want to buy what is sold as true cinnamon, which is like the cinnamon that smells like cinnamon red hots. It's sweeter. Basically, there's a bunch of different varieties of trees that are in the cinnamon family that give us a bunch of different things.
Wow.
And we want true cinnamon. The really sweet, really hot one. Okay. So
is that all the 3 tablespoons?
Yes, that is all for the 3 tablespoons.
Sweet. All right.
All right, next up. So this measurement is 1.5 cup plus 2 tablespoons, which is not quite 3/4 of a cup.
Wait, sorry, say that one more time.
The measurement is 1/2 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons.
Okay.
Generally 3/4 of a cup. It's just, a little wiggly. Cypress grass, also known as nutsedge. And what you want from that is not the grass, but the rhizomes, the roots.
Cypress grass rhizomes.
Yeah. And it's spelled not Cyprus like the city or the island, but Cyperus. Cyperus. Probably the same root, probably the same thing, but so cypress grass, aka nutsedge.
Okay.
Juniper berries. In the original things, they have 2 different types of juniper berries, the large and the small. probably 2 different varieties that were growing in that area. But I mean, these days, if you've got juniper berries, this is what you got. So 1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons of juniper berries. Pine kernels.
How many pine kernels?
1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons.
Oh boy.
Same deal.
Okay.
And then the bane of my existence, pecker, aka pecker, Peker.
That's another 1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons?
Yes.
Oh boy.
And that one could be a bunch of things. And I have gone with ground wood of the sycamore fig. That is going to be impossible to find. I had a stroke of luck through a obscure company that had found one growing wild in California, and they just happened to be selling bits of it for people to carve into like pen blanks and stuff. And the pen blanks were like $2 each. So I bought a box of like 8 of them and have been slowly grinding them down. So what might you use instead of this? One of the other folks who wrote extensively about recreating this incense uses henna instead. Henna wasn't just used for dyeing hair, it was widely used for a variety of purposes. She had a really good like set of reasons for why she chose henna. And I will say, my first batch of Kyphi, henna was what I used, not sycamore. And there was something that wasn't quite right when I added the henna. Like, it had a really odd smell and effect to it. So I'm not 100% convinced, but you can. The thing is this is an expensive enough hobby that you don't necessarily want to experiment and have it turn out shitty. There's a possibility that pecker was opium. Well, that's right out. Given where it falls in the recipe, it is probably some type of ground wood. And so you might be able to get away with, you'll see some recipes that have sandalwood. The thing is there's no recipe from the ancient world that says sandalwood. And they had a word that we know for sandalwood. Sandalwood has a very, very unique smell, a very particular smell. The other thing that people have suggested is aloes wood, which was also widely used. And because of that, we know what that word was. Doesn't appear in any except for a much later recipe from Syria. Also, aloes wood, if you think sandalwood is expensive, aloes wood is prohibitively expensive. It is stupid expensive.
Ready for
Yeah, I
Cauldron to come back?
Yep.
All right.
So, lacking anything else, I would find, actually, I would probably use cassia wood. Cassia bark. It's got a milder smell and scent and whatnot. It will do the work. Yeah, well, you need something that's going to be a little bit less sticky. Like, this needs some ground wood in it to hold it together. And wow, that was loud. And kind of counteract exactly how ridiculously sticky this is. Once you add this and the honey and the resins,
like all sticky.
Like I said, this at the end of it, it was like candy making.
Yeah, I remember the texture of the last batch. It was very, not goopy. Like, it was thicker than goopy.
Very, very sticky. A little bit like taffy. Like weirdly sticky taffy made with honey.
Delicious. I mean, you could try that too, right?
I will argue against delicious, since I was the one that had it stuck in my fingers, in the lines of my fingerprints, under my nails for weeks. Like, it was everywhere. Well,
you're trying to make it?
You have to roll it.
Oh my gosh.
So you're taking this I was trying to roll it before it had cured. So like, I'm taking this incredibly sticky stuff and I'm trying to hand roll it, and I'm just getting covered in it.
Wow. Sorry.
Okay.
I stole your cold.
I am going to wash the sticky raisins off my hands and my knife while I'm at it. Take it away, Lyria.
Well, there's actually a question. How long does Kyphi last?
If it's properly cured, it will last. Keep it in an airtight container. It'll last for probably years. Like,
Mhm.
it's one of those things that, by all reports, the longer you store it, the more rich and varied the scent becomes.
Interesting. Sort of like wine.
Yes.
But, well, less liquidy.
Yeah. And so, like, if you make it, like, if I make this stuff this year, this is going to be best burnt sometime next year.
Okay.
It will have cured and deepened and like all of the different scents. So this is like a long, slow process. Like you are doing this well in advance of when you want to use it. You can use the raw Kyphi, like when it's not really cured, you can use it. It really does smell quite differently.
So the cured stuff that we have, like in the closet at Inspiration House,
yeah,
that'll be ready to get packaged up at some point this year.
Yeah, no, it's why.
Okay.
Well, no, it's pretty much ready now. It's why when we were like, you were like, hey, can we sell this? And I'm like, I don't think it's ready. It's why I was sitting on it for so long. Okay, so we've got the raisins. The order in which I gave you the ingredients was based off of measurements more than the order in which they go in. Just FYI. Okay.
Is this just the second time that you've made?
So I did a couple of variations. I did the full on like boil, double, and toil and whatnot for the Kyphi. And then for the travel channel, I wanted to use the effect of the incense, the opening of the gates part of it. But I also knew, and this is where I cheated a little bit, I knew I was going to be on TV. Mm-hmm. And I knew that based on previous experiences with television producers, they want something that has a visual effect. So I knew what I needed to do was Kyphi that was going to be, also I knew that I was going to be limited in what I had as resources. I probably wasn't going to be able to get them to get a bakur burner or a hot plate. So since I'm in Salem, I knew I could guarantee a charcoal, which meant making a very different type of Kyphi, trying to get all of the effect and all of the scent without all of this. So what I did was I took a little chunk of the pre-made Kyphi and I kind of used it like a sourdough starter. And I stuck it in there.
That's right, I remember.
Yeah, and I melted it back down, and then I went through the dry ingredients, and the resins, and I made a very tiny micro batch that was more resin heavy than it was fruit and honey heavy, with the intent like it was these dense little pastilles that when you put them on the charcoal, like just fumed white smoke everywhere. The inside of the meeting hall. Because I burned, I think, 2 of them during like the Salem Live in that hall. The hall was just full of that smoke. The whole place. Everybody went home with their hair smelling of it.
Seems like the best possible outcome.
Yeah, but it's also why, like, you know, when I sold off the batch that I'd made from that, like that was very precious, and you got like a couple of tiny little pieces for $20 because of what went into that. I used black hojari frankincense. So things I didn't know going into this was that there's a whole bunch of different varieties of frankincense, and it's a little bit like wine or stuff, where the varieties are based on like what tree it comes from or what type of tree, how it's harvested, how much resin is there, how much bark is in it, from these like green tiers that are usually reserved for the guy in charge of Oman. I forget what his title is, and those are the ones where I'm like, $60 an ounce. I'm not sure. Like up to 160. Like that's freaking expensive. Like wow. Like whoa. Down to what's kind of like the easiest, cheapest stuff. It's the stuff that you're going to find as frankincense in almost all of your witchcraft shops. Tiny little like pea-sized bits that look kind of yellowish. Interesting or gross, depending on your perspective. Frankincense was associated with the weeping of the wounded eye of Horus. And if you've ever had an infected eye, that some frankincense has that look, that color to it. Okay. Question?
No, just there's actually a bunch of people who are saying they really are enjoying seeing you on portals and have been following you since Paranormal State, and And also a bunch of people are really enjoying the history and like all the stories that you just keep stored in that amazing brain of yours.
Well, I mean, it's the stories that keep me coming back to stuff like this. I love, I mean, I think if I had to typify, like, I'm a mythologist, you know, in the style of Joseph Campbell. Like, I love the stories. I mean, I use that information in a lot of practical ways, but what keeps me coming back are the stories. And I think what this definitely sucks up
Yeah,
are the stories, especially the weirder the better.
for sure.
All right, so here is where we do this kind of slow process with the juniper. Is not terrible. Just grind it down and try not to lose it.
Ooh, jumping juniper berries.
Give me that back.
There you go.
Okay. I probably should have put less in. Like, this is one of the biggest grinders I could find. It's used for cornmeal. It has a, I think, Mexican name. I'm not going to remember it off the top of my head. Also bought it at World Market. I think it was $20. That was on sale though. Like, I'm a bargain hunter. So end of summer clearance. Also, it's just because like it's kind of heavy, but it's also like the easiest on your wrists. You can just sit here and like go around in circles and it'll grind stuff by dint of its weight.
Very different than a singing bowl.
Very, very.
It's a grinding bowl that
And
came out from.
you'll start to smell this sort of piney scent of. There's a lot of piney scent stuff that goes into Kyphi, which is interesting given the smell that you have at the end. It has layers of smell at the end. And the pine and the sharp cleanness of the juniper and the pine resin and the frankincense is sort of the first thing you smell. And then it goes through these layers of the medicine-y smell of the myrrh, and then to this sort of long lasting, lingering, smoky sweetness. And again, the stuff that I made for Travel Channel, you could get away with burning that on a charcoal. In that respect, you got more of the frankincense, and the myrrh, you got way less of that sweet that went with it.
Oh wow, the smell of those juniper berries is intense.
Yes.
I really like that.
Also why you're supposed to hand grind it. Like there is something to be said for doing this old school.
Yeah. And
it gave me an appreciation for the smell of each of the ingredients, like what I was putting into this. And for me, you know, I'm not going to sit here and recite hymns to gods. I don't. That's not me. I thought about composing some interesting ones in the thing of like, you know, Osiris and blah 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 blah. The thing is I'm team Set. Not that Set, because that's when people started making fun of Set and they totally like lost the whole point of that god. I'm like Set back when he was the twin of Horus, and they were these principles, equal and opposite, night and day, moon and sun, and they kind of held the universe in balance. There's a Hebsed festival that is integral to them, and you can see there's a couple of stelae where in the earliest versions you have Set and Horus, and they're standing with a knot that each of them are holding this piece of a cord, and there's a pillar between them. And they are, it reminds me always of the Hindu story of the milk ocean, churning the milk ocean, which is, look it up, it's a neat story. But so they've got basically like this axis mundi, this world pillar, and they are the ones not just holding it, but like it's in like a little thing. So they also turn it, they churn it. As forces, it's not just static, they're dynamic. Later versions of this representation, because Set is usually represented, Horus has a hawk head. He's pretty easy to recognize, a peregrine falcon. Set has what they call the Set animal. Some people think it's an aardvark, and they're idiots. They're just wrong. If you look at some of the older stuff, some type of hound or dog, some people have suggested a greyhound. I'm going to go with a breed that just doesn't exist anymore. It's got a long, thin snout that has a little bit of a downturn to it and like these very high pricked ears. And so later versions of this stele, when of this representation, when Set has fallen out of favor, to the point where like they would strike his name from things, they would erase the names of pharaohs who had Set in their name. Like there's a lot of drama around this god. Later versions would replace Set with Anubis or with Thoth, Anpu or Tahuti, depending on like how you want to pronounce that. All of our familiar names of these gods and goddesses are very, very westernized, based off of the Hellenized, the Greek versions of their names. Anpu or Anpet, although it's more of a feminine. Anyway, I'm probably making anybody who's got an Egyptology degree crawl the walls with some of this.
The whole red not said pronunciation
style,
style?
Yeah, exactly that.
Gotcha.
And also I will die on the hill of Set. Like we have the contendings of Horus and Set, but that came about so much later. In a lot of ways, Set is like Loki, in the sense that he was a much more important deity, possibly even a creator god in an older pantheon, who they couldn't quite get rid of, but had a lot of problematic qualities that didn't agree with what ended up being acceptable. And so they kind of stuck him in there, but they made him a trickster or a bad guy or a fool. And a lot of things don't make a whole lot of sense because there was a lot of retconning. Okay, this is the first part of our ground up juniper berries. And that is what those look like now. And that was the first cup. I have got another 2 tablespoons that I'm going to have to grind. We dump this into the pot. I grab my tablespoon measurer.
There've been not questions exactly, but a couple people in the last couple of days have mentioned the issue. So there's a person who loves your Gothic Book of the Dead, Walking the Twilight Path, but has folks, I think, in her group, spiritual tribe, are scared of it. And someone else had the same reaction to looking at the fact that you taught about demonology. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little while you're grinding juniper berries.
Let me take my rings off too. I realize I'm probably scratching them up. I wonder if it's just the cover. And no, we've been okay. So the Walking the Twilight Path, it's possibly the cover because it's got like this scary looking dead guy on it. It looks a little creepy. I get very little say on the covers, so that one was kind of like, sure, okay. For the Twilight Path, like a lot of people are just intensely afraid of death and the dead and anything that involves like really digging into that, because our culture has become so far removed. Like we've sanitized death. The reason we call a funeral parlor is it was meant to replace your actual parlor in your home. Up until funeral parlors became very widely used, you washed the body at home, you dressed the body at home, and you had your wake. You showed the body at home. It was a lot more hands-on. It was a lot more intimate, and it gave people a very different, much more personal view. If we look at it from a modern perspective, it feels like a very scarring view. But how much more closure do you get when you are involved in the process of not just like dealing with a dead body, but you are taking care of the cast off vessel of your loved one, and you are giving it this one final gift of caring for it and cleaning it and letting everyone else say goodbye as well. Like there's a process there, there's a ritual there that we've lost, and in kind of putting it in the hands of the funerary industrial complex, we sort of skirt out of having to look death in the face, having to deal with the fact that it is messy, that it is yucky, that there's things that happen to bodies once there's nobody home anymore that we don't want to think about. And I think in a lot of ways, collectively, our culture just averts its gaze. Right now, we see that in the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have died, who are right now dying. I think, I don't know if we're up to 3,000 a day in the United States, but if you note any of your news feeds, they have stopped reporting how many people have died. I mean, it wasn't bad enough like that they were, no, these were just numbers. These weren't people. How many names have we actually heard of people who have died? Have they done memorials? Have they recited names? Do we have a wall? Do we have a list? No, we don't want to even think about it. It is an unreal number of deaths. And our brains, our society collectively rebels against having to think about that as a real thing. So it's easier to just avert the gaze. Think about something else. Focus on the people who have recovered. And that's not to say that we shouldn't celebrate the people who have recovered, but I think we do a disservice to both life and death if we don't also acknowledge who is dying, that each one of those is a brother or a sister, a father, a mother, a grandparent, a child. These are people who have relationships. These are people who months ago had aspirations.
Yeah.
They had lives. They had no reason to assume that that would be cut short. And I think the greatest tragedy right now is that they are dying alone, and that their family cannot have any closure. So we're in kind of a crisis with that. But to get back to things, people being scared of stuff, demonology is, I blame some of the TV shows, even the one that I was on, for making like even the, I mean, demons as Voldemort, like don't say the name. And at conventions, we've had people actively be afraid to approach the booth simply because the Dictionary of Demons was visible. And they were so filled with superstitious dread of these names that having the names somewhere recorded was automatically going to summon these things and catch their attention in the same way that saying Voldemort will catch his attention. That's not how it works. The knowledge is what protects you. Like being educated about it protects you. If you want to even go to the mythology behind the names of demons and evil spirits, all the way back to Sumer and Babylon, the name is what gives you power to compel and to banish and to bind and to exorcise. That name gives you more power over them than they can possibly have over you. So even if these are objectively real beings that you are terrified of, having the name puts you in a position of authority and power. It's not something that endangers you. So that's my answer to that. Like,
it's always struck me as so self-defeating almost for people to stay so far away that they then don't get access to the things that could give them power over the things that they fear.
Well, and I hate to say it, but it's always struck me, usually the folks who are so worried about studying about a big bad thing are also the ones who think that if you don't talk about sex with your kids, everything will be fine.
Oh, gotcha. So avoidance is the
solution. Avoiding the scary stuff means that the scary stuff can't happen. And newsflash, if you don't teach your kids about sex, you end up with me. My mom, I was raised by the same person. My grandma did not like to talk about sex. Like that was, my mom got chucked into college during the hippie age, like early 70s, and didn't know shit from shit. And you know what that meant? She got pregnant at 20.
I mean, out of that, we get this wonderful Michelle.
I mean, yeah. But it kind of screwed my mom's life up.
Yeah.
It certainly would have been better to have had the conversation than to leave somebody in the dark.
Yeah.
Even when those conversations are hard, even when those conversations are scary. Everything smells like juniper.
It really does. This is the best.
Yep.
How did I miss this part before? It smells like my desert.
Were I think we might have been on another one of your hikes.
That is a thing.
Yeah,
that
no,
sometimes
I'm pretty sure.
I
Yeah,
could make off with
everything.
this.
I mean, you can stick your nose in there, like the
Okay.
whole thing. This next up are going to be my little.
Ugh, that smells more like raisins.
Sorry.
It's not a desert.
Oh, pine kernels, 1.5 cup and 2 tablespoons. It's a third. You are a half. Yeah, I'm still not 100% convinced that pine nuts are what they mean.
Hmm.
And yet, that's the most common thing. There's a couple of good books. I'm trying to remember. I'm gonna blank on her name. The thing is, it's out of print anyway, so it's really hard to get a hold of. But it was one of the main resources that all of the articles about Kyphi and recreating this stuff sourced. All right, 1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons, level-ish tablespoons. I'm going with slightly heaping in the cases of things that are like big and chunky like this because, of course, I was taking weight measurements and kind of trying to do stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting question. Is there an incense you know of that's recommended to help with anxiety?
I have a friend who responds very well to frankincense, and has been burning frankincense almost daily through all of this. She works as a respiratory specialist in a pediatric ward. I forget the exact term of her thing, but like she has a really high stress job, and she is prone to anxiety. She's an empath, and she has definitely found frankincense to be a soothing scent for her. Sometimes I think it comes down to what you find settling in terms of scents, because different people are wired differently. I'm a super taster, like it's a genetic weird thing. And I think this might be the stem of my my rallying cry of this might not work for everybody, because there are qualities that different things have, and we know that there are some chemical qualities that things that had traditional magical associations, they were really doing the thing. Like frankincense was used to clear a space, to not just cleanse, but to drive off spirits and stuff like that, to try to clear a sick room. And we know it has antibiotic, antibacterial properties. It does. Sage as well. And so like white sage that was used for smudging, one of the reasons that you smudged is you were literally cleaning the air. And whether I am of the opinion that ancient people were not as stupid as people think they are, want to think that they are, just because they didn't have the science that we have in the same way that we have it. So I posit that they were very well aware that this was helping with these things. That's another good incense. Here's my other problem with mushing these guys, is it just turns into a paste. Like it's just like pine nut butter. Anyway, what's another good soothing scent? I find personally sandalwood mixed with a little cinnamon very soothing. More sandalwood than cinnamon. There's a scent that mermaid company I was talking about had made. I'd never thought to do this. There's a resin called benzoin. Styrax is one of the other words for it. And it is mixed with that labdanum that I was talking about. I believe the mix of it is called lubanum. I had never heard of it before. They sent it as a sample, and I'm in love. It is
an amazing scent.
It is just this rich, warm, syrupy. I find it not just soothing, but it really kind of helps put me in like a meditative state. It's a more masculine than feminine scent, and that's the one thing that you're going to notice with me is I stay away from a lot of the florals because I'm allergic to so much of it, that even if it might have a use, I do not get the same thing out of it. I mostly just get an asthma attack.
So it looks like our devices are starting to lose power.
Well, I am done with what I was planning on doing, with the sole exception of I add this in and then we pop open this wine
cool.
and put in the wine.
Cool. There was one last question which I think we can answer before any
Yeah.
of the feeds cut out.
Okay.
Can this be used with making spells?
Yes, absolutely. And I would argue that it's used also for doing magic, especially magic that has to do with dreams, visions, spirit communication. That was one of the main reasons I was interested in this, is the reported properties it has for opening you to spirit communication and opening the gates to the spirit realm, and especially encouraging communication in visions and dreams. So it's a very magical incense.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for being here, everybody. It was lovely to chat with you all, and much more entertaining for me than just sitting here and watching Michelle, grind things away and chop things up. And
Oh, that's going to be fun cleaning up.
oh, yeah, it is. All right. Have a wonderful night. Rest well, everyone. Stay healthy.
Bye all. Yeah, the first time